It was a regular day at the Cascade City Police Department. Officers were processing paperwork, answering calls, and handling arrests. The room was filled with the usual sounds of busy chatter and occasional radio transmissions. Suddenly, the glass doors at the entrance opened with a loud whoosh, and the room fell silent. A tall, well-dressed figure walked in, his purposeful stride making everyone stop what they were doing. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, had just entered the station. There were no Secret Service agents in sight, making the situation all the more surreal. Sergeant James Cooper, a seasoned officer with over 20 years of experience, immediately stood straighter. His instincts kicked in. What was the president doing here? Whispers began to circulate rapidly. Some officers quickly adjusted their uniforms, while others simply stared in stunned silence. No one had been told about a presidential visit. Was this some sort of special security exercise or a simple misunderstanding? Sergeant Cooper stepped forward, clearing his throat. Mr. President, is there something we can assist you with? Trump surveyed the room, his gaze scanning the officers as if searching for something or someone. In his usual direct manner, he replied, "I need to speak with your chief of police." Immediately. Cooper hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Right this way, sir." He gestured for Trump to follow him, and the officers remained frozen in place, eyes fixed on the powerful figure walking through the station. Chief Laura Garcia was in her office, reviewing paperwork from the previous night. A no-nonsense leader, Garcia was well-respected by her team. But nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. A knock at the door, followed by the voice of Sergeant Cooper, interrupted her thoughts. "Chief, we have an unexpected visitor." Before she could respond, the door swung open, and in walked Donald Trump. Garcia immediately stood, offering her hand. "Mr. President, this is an honor. What brings you to our department today?" Trump shook her hand but wasted no time. "I need your help with something personal." Chief Garcia raised an eyebrow. Personal? She had expected some kind of official business, but this was unexpected. Trump reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a small, weathered photograph. The edges were frayed, and the colors had started to fade. He gently placed it on her desk. Garcia looked down at the photo. It was of a young man, standing beside a uniformed officer. The officer looked proud, his hand resting protectively on the young man's shoulder. "Who is this?" Garcia asked, intrigued. Trump's voice softened. "That boy is me, and the officer who saved my life was the man in this photo." Sergeant Cooper leaned in closer, his eyes widening. "Wait, are you saying you never got a chance to thank him?" Trump nodded solemnly. "And now I need to find him, or his family." Garcia picked up the photo, studying it. The officer in the picture stood with pride, his uniform neat and crisp, his smile warm. There was something noble about him, something that suggested he had truly loved his work. "Who is he, Mr. President?" she asked. Trump's expression grew more serious. "His name was Officer Daniel Roberts. When I was 18, I was making some reckless choices, trying to fit in with the wrong crowd. One night, I was on the verge of making a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. But then, Officer Roberts stopped me. He didn't just arrest me, he talked to me. He gave me advice that stuck with me." Chief Garcia exchanged a glance with Sergeant Cooper. This was unlike anything they had expected. "You want us to track down his family?" Garcia asked. Trump nodded firmly. "I owe him everything." Trump leaned back, his mind drifting back to that night. It was 1965, and he was just another teenager, making poor decisions. His friends had dared him to do something dangerous and illegal, and he had foolishly followed along. But before things could escalate, Officer Daniel Roberts appeared out of nowhere, placing a hand on his shoulder and saying, "Kid, this isn't the path for you. You've got a future. Don't throw it all away for a stupid mistake." Trump paused, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I want to find him or his family and make things right." Chief Garcia nodded, understanding the weight of what he was asking. "I'll do my best, Mr. President, but this was decades ago. Officer Roberts may not even be alive anymore." Trump's jaw tightened. "Then find his family. Somebody deserves to know how much their father, their grandfather, changed my life." Later that evening, Sergeant Cooper sat in front of an aging police database, scrolling through archives. The search was long and grueling, but after hours of digging, he found something. A personnel file for Officer Daniel Roberts. He had retired in 1987 and passed away in 2014. Sergeant Cooper sighed, not wanting to bring bad news to Trump, but then he noticed something in the file. Next of kin. Sophie Roberts. He rushed back to Chief Garcia's office. "I've got good news and bad news, Mr. President," Cooper said hesitantly. Trump's gaze hardened. "Give me the bad news first." Cooper took a deep breath. "Officer Roberts passed away 10 years ago." Trump's face dropped for a moment. "And the good news? He has a daughter. Sophie Roberts. She lives here in Cascade City." Trump stood up immediately. Then we find her. After a quiet drive through Cascade City, Trump and the team arrived at Sophie Roberts' home. It was a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Sophie, in her 40s, had never been in the spotlight, living a regular life, unaware that her father had impacted someone as powerful as the president. Trump knocked on the door, and Sophie opened it, stunned to see him standing there. "Mr. President?" she stammered, her voice filled with disbelief. Trump held up the old photograph. "Your father saved my life when I was 18. I never got the chance to thank him." Sophie's eyes widened as she recognized the photo. "My dad? Officer Roberts?" she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "This has to be a mistake." Trump's voice softened. "No mistake. Your father changed my life, and I need you to know what he did for me." Sophie opened the door wider, allowing Trump in. They sat in her simple living room, and she stared at the photo in his hands. "He was a good man," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking. "The best." Trump nodded. "He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He saved me from making a huge mistake." Sophie wiped her eyes, her voice quivering. "After he retired, we struggled. He gave so much to this city, but when he passed, it was like he was forgotten." Trump's jaw clenched. "Not anymore." Sophie spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't want pity, Mr. President. I just miss my dad." Trump leaned forward. "Your father didn't just save my life. He saved countless others. And I'm going to make sure his name is never forgotten." The next day, Trump made some phone calls. This was personal, not political. He ensured Officer Roberts would be honored and started a fund for the families of fallen officers. He even arranged for Sophie to receive a fully paid home in a better neighborhood. "This is for you and your family," Trump told her when he handed her the deed to her new house. "Your father would have done the same for me." A week later, a ceremony was held in Officer Roberts' honor at the Cascade City Police Department. A plaque was unveiled in his memory, and Sophie stood with Trump, Chief Garcia, and Sergeant Cooper as the crowd applauded. "Your father was a hero," Trump said, his voice steady. "He changed lives, and he should never be forgotten." Sophie watched the officers gather around the plaque, reading the inscription. She whispered, "Dad would never have believed this." Trump turned to her. "Your father believed in second chances. He gave one to me. This is the least I could do." As Trump boarded his plane back to Washington, he felt a sense of peace, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Officer Roberts had shaped his life and left a legacy of kindness. Trump smiled, thinking about how one man's act of goodness had rippled through many lives, starting with his own. And as the story of Officer Roberts spread across the country, Trump knew that some debts were meant to be repaid, and some heroes would never be forgotten.